Hi, my name is Garth Sharif, and welcome to Professional Ethics and Transformative Technologies. That's a heavy title, Ethics and Transformative Technologies. We'll need to define both of those. Now, when we think about the word transformative, something large, something really impactful for our lives in terms of technology. So I'm thinking back to my own experience and the corded phone. I'm not sure if that's a formal definition of the phone. You remember, for some of you, the phone that had a cord to it. It could have been the windy elastic phone that you could only go so far in your home or your apartment when you're making a call. And that was the phone that I grew up with. And then we look at the phones that we have now, smartphones, and just the differences in these technologies and how we use and interact with those technologies. A big difference. Would we say transformative? I would say yes, and we will define what transformative is. And the question is, when we have a transformative technology or a large impactful change in the way we do things because of technology, what are the ethical implications? What are the implications to decision making within our individual personal lives and as professionals, as CPAs? What does it do in terms of how we look at the world, how we look at making decisions? And when we talk about ethics, we can define that by the CPA Code of Conduct. There are 5 pillars to ethics. Let's go through all 5. There's professional behavior, integrity and due care, objectivity, professional competence, and confidentiality. And when we look at those as a whole, what we're really talking about is how CPAs make decisions. And do transformative technologies, which we will define shortly, do they impact or give us pause as professionals to how we make decisions, especially under the umbrella of ethics and the 5 pillars I just defined? So we're going to go into what this means, but we do need to define transformative technologies because I did have a choice in terms of titling this program Professional Ethics and Transformative Technologies. I could have also titled this Professional Ethics and Emerging Technologies, Professional Ethics and Disruptive Technologies, or Disruptive Innovation, but I chose Professional Ethics and Transformative Technologies. Let's go through each of those terms. I do love Venn diagrams, and on the screen you're seeing the Venn diagram between emerging technologies, we are seeing disruptive innovation or technologies, and transformative technology. So they all refer to impactful technological change that affect the way in which we live and our decision making. And they all have a little bit of a different nuance in their definition. Let's go through each of those, starting with emerging technologies. Here's a definition of emerging technologies. Emerging technologies are technologies whose development, practical applications, or both are still largely unrealized, such that they are figuratively emerging into prominence from a background of non-existence or obscurity. So every year there are multiple lists that come out from Scientific American or other major journals that provide us what these emerging technologies are. For example, robotics. And we'll talk about artificial intelligence, but robotics may be in the form of strong AI, and I'll define that in this program. Nanotechnology as another example of an emerging technology, something that is being developed. We still don't know exactly how it will impact our lives, but it is something that there's a lot of research and money and investment going in towards. And then another emerging technology, which is augmented reality, VR. Now we're seeing that in the gaming field, but there's also other practical uses for VR or augmented reality technology. Some examples of emerging technology. So why didn't I choose to title this course Professional Ethics and Emerging Technology? Well, the technologies that we're going to talk about today are more here, even though they're still in development. So they're a little bit further along than emerging. So that's why we didn't title this, or I didn't title this Professional Ethics and Emerging Technologies. Let's take a look at the next definition that we could have chosen, Disruptive Innovation / Disruptive Technology. The academic and professor at Harvard, the late Clayton Christensen, coined the phrase disruptive technology, which he later changed again into disruptive innovation, let's take a look at both of those definitions. Disruptive technology. A new technology that completely changes the way things are done. A disruptive technology overturns a traditional business model, which makes it harder for an established firm to embrace. Clayton Christensen liked that definition at the time he came up with it as a way of looking at certain types of technologies as a negative, potentially, in the way it's disrupting what we're used to. But he then came up with another definition that he felt was more true to what disruption means, which was disruptive innovation. Let's take a look at that definition. Disruptive innovation describes a process which a product or service takes root initially in simple applications at the bottom of a market and then relentlessly moves up a market, eventually displacing established competitors. So we have emerging technologies, disruptive innovation, and then the final definition, which is the title for this course, Transformative Technologies. What is the definition of transformative technologies? A technology that fundamentally changes our interaction with each other and information. And why did I go with this term as the title for this course? Because I could have gone with the other two. They all really discuss and analyze and look at technology that impacts our lives and our decision making. But I went with transformative technologies because it is framed positively. And when we think about CPAs as a profession, when we think about critical thinking and professional judgment, we do think about ourselves as transformative agents coming in to make change, to help provide our knowledge, wisdom, and expertise. So I like the positive framing of this term. And there's also a great list of transformative technologies that are out there every year. Tech Republic provides a top 10 list. So I wanted to take you through the top 10 list from Tech Republic. There are more than just these transformative technologies, which could also be referred to as emerging technologies or disruptive innovation to some extent. But we'll take a look at these 10, but we're not going to go through all 10. We're going to go through 3 of them in detail because these are the ones that are most impactful for the CPA profession and ethical decision making. So here is a list of a top 10 transformative technologies. And again, there are more than just this list. And you might see other transformative technologies that you might think are specifically more impactful for what you do if you're in a specific industry. But this is a good start because it does give us the top 3 that we're going to examine in this program. But let's take a look at the top list. Artificial intelligence, 5G, big data / the Internet of Things. And we'll talk about that. Serverless computing, biometrics, augmented reality, blockchain, robotics, natural processing language, quantum computing. So that's the list. We're going to examine 3 of these in depth in this program for what it means for decision making and how it might impact us as CPAs in our profession. What are those 3? We're going to take a look at big data / the Internet of Things, then artificial intelligence, and finally blockchain. And we'll take a high-level look at each of these in terms of what they are right now as transformative technologies, but then also look at what they might mean for us as professionals, as CPAs, and how they might affect our decision-making. So we'll refer to those technologies as the Transformative Technologies 3. I do like alliteration, so you have one there. Also could be a new superhero group to compete with the Fantastic Four, but we'll take a look at blockchain, artificial intelligence, and really the fuel for both of those, big data and the Internet of Things. And we'll take an overview of those technologies, but we want to also talk about ethics and how it maps to our ethical decision making. We talked about the 5 pillars of ethics as CPAs that we're governed by, but we're going to look at it very precisely in terms of 3 areas of ethical decision making or ethical implications. First, we'll take a look at these technologies and their potential impact on privacy, or if you're in Europe, where I sometimes spend some of my family time, vacation time, privacy. So if you hear me go between privacy and privacy, that's where it's coming from. We'll also take a look at environmental, social, and governance, ESG, and how these technologies affect those principles and standards. And finally, we'll take a look at how these technologies may affect our professional judgment. And the way in which we're going to look at it is demonstrated in this chart, which I'll go through. So when we look at privacy, we'll focus on big data and the Internet of Things, which I will go through as an overview as to what these are. Then when we talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, We will look at the impacts of blockchain and artificial intelligence on ESG, both positively and potentially negatively as well. And then finally, when it comes to professional judgment, we will also take a look at the impacts of artificial intelligence and blockchain as transformative technology and the impact on professional judgment, decision making, critical thinking of CPAs. What is our agenda for the program today? Well, right now we are in the introduction, and after the introduction, we will go through each of the Transformative Technology 3 as an overview. So we'll talk about an overview of big data and the Internet of Things, an overview of artificial intelligence, and an overview of blockchain. I really want to highlight overview because they're not going to be a deep dive. We do have other courses if you want to deep dive in those, but enough to give you a sense of what these technologies are and how they are transformative so that we can link it to the ethical implications such as privacy, environmental, social, and governance, and professional judgment. We will also have interviews in the program specifically on privacy. And then finally, we'll have the ethical implications for CPAs. What can we do as CPAs as these transformative technologies begin to impact our lives for us to have safeguards for potentially the negative consequences across those areas of privacy, professional judgment, and ESG, but also to embrace the good that comes out of these technologies as well. And finally, we will end with a conclusion, and hopefully you'll have a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, to take away from this program. So in any course that I deliver, I do my best to infuse some pop culture references. When I say pop culture, I should put air quotes around them because they're my popular culture references. Sometimes it's too Star Trek heavy, which I have done before in other courses. But I will do that here because it's interesting to draw from pop culture to see examples of where we have reacted as a society to something, in this case, how we've reacted to a transformative technology. I referred to one being the corded phone at the beginning, and again, that's probably the wrong term for that phone. But another transformative technology or emerging technology or disruptive innovation that we can see that has impacted our lives, depending on when you were born, is the internet. And I remember as a student at the University of Waterloo in 1998, I took a course on the internet. I believe it was called the internet, because we didn't understand exactly what it was and how it would impact our lives. And the way in which it's impacted our lives, there's some things that was salient from that program and other things it couldn't have predicted 20 plus years out. It's interesting to look at pop culture for those moments as well. And so on the screen right now, you're seeing Sandra Bullock, and you might remember many of her films. She's a fantastic actress, been in award-winning films. Maybe not this one, called The Net. If you remember this one, I remember it in 1995, a movie about the internet. And here is the plot description. I thought I'd just tell you the plot description of the movie The Net. Computer programmer Angela Bennett, Sandra Bullock, starts a new freelance gig, and strangely, all her colleagues start dying. Does it have something to do with the mysterious disc she was given? Her suspicions are raised when during a trip to Mexico, she meets a handsome stranger intent on locating the same disc. Soon Angela is tangled up in a far-reaching conspiracy that leads to her identity being erased. Can she stop the same thing from happening to her in real life? Now, this is an interesting plot synopsis. There are a lot of assumptions being made in 1995 about the internet that are completely wrong because that was made at the moment in which we were starting to understand what the internet was. So it's a very entertaining film to go back and to watch. But interesting enough, one of the items that they really focus on in that movie is privacy, is identity. So there are parts that are still relevant right now because we will be talking about privacy and transformative technologies, and that is discussed with certain elements of the internet. But it's interesting to look at that movie and to see how they saw it in 1995 with this emerging technology being the internet. So we will have pop culture references throughout the program as a way to engage you, but also make you think about how things change over time. Now, one of the things I'd like you to reflect on as we begin our program and get into our first module, have you experienced a transformative technology in your lifetime? Whatever it might be. For me, it is the internet, it is Netflix, it is smartphones, but have you experienced it yourself? And could you write it down and reflect what was happening as you started to learn about this transformative technology, and what is it that you see in it today that might have been different from the way you experienced it when you first understood what it was, and what's the gap there? it's interesting to take a look at that perspective. So I'll give you time to reflect on a transformative technology that might have impacted your life and professional career. And then we'll move on to our first module, which is the first in the Transformative Technology 3.